Hello, and thank you to the plenary discussion for the Envisioning Transdisciplinary Behavioral Science. My name is Dana Schloesser, and I am going to talk to you briefly, introduce you to the Brain Behavior Quantification and Synchronization program that is within the Brain Initiative. There is a recorded talk that's on the Lab Roots event page that has more information, but just briefly to give you a flavor of what this program is about, we are really trying to be able to advance our understanding of how brain gives rise to behavior. And as behavior occurring in this multidimensional brain body system, which is also operating within a dynamic environment. And we need multiple methodologies and perspectives to be able to collect this type of diverse data, anywhere from the neural to the physiological and environmental data. And in order to do this, the goal of the brain behavior quantification and synchronization program is to develop the high resolution tools, platforms, and theories to be able to quantify the behaviors as this multidimensional response, and to get the new conceptual and computational models of behavioral systems, and establish, importantly, these cross-disciplinary consortium that can disseminate and develop new tools, ontologies, and research designs and ethical frameworks in order to really push our understanding of brain and behavior forward, to disseminate new paradigms and to advance development of closed-loop therapeutic interventions, as well as developing a robust ethical framework. So, as I mentioned, in order to do this, we really do need a very interdisciplinary team. And in order to do this, we really need to build a consortium that involves several different stakeholders from different disciplines, including sensor technologies, behavioral science, researchers, clinicians, data and computational scientists, and ethicists and advocacy groups in order to advance our goals. And so along with this effort, we have really emphasized the importance of consortium building to bring these PIs together in order to advance transdisciplinary research in this area. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Dr. Holly Moore.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dana. She's our co-lead of the Brain Behavioral Quantification and Synchronization Program in the Brain Initiative. Thanks so much. And thanks to our co-lead, Holly Listenby. I think she's in the audience. I want to take a moment here to thank everybody on the BBQS team, especially the organismal behavior team, in particular, Sandeep Kishore and Farah Bader, who I think is on here. Wave, Farah. Farah did an incredible amount of work to bring you the amazing lineup of speakers that you have today, as well as this panel. And we'd also like to thank our Lab Roots colleagues, Lynn Brainerd, Melanie Chan, and the Lab Roots moderators. And then finally, I'd like to thank and welcome our panelists, our 7 scientists, to the panel discussion. Now, before we jump right in, I want to sort of remind everybody some housekeeping. The panelists will raise their hand physically when they want to jump in. You can expect our panelists to jump in and out. It's going to be a lively discussion. And to the audience, our web audience, we'll be answering as many questions in the Q&A as we can. And we'll get to them after if we can't answer them live. We will not be monitoring the group chat, so you can use that to talk to each other, but we won't be monitoring that. So what I'm going to do here, or how we're going to start out, is we're going to start out with a sort of a lightning round of self-introductions. And as each scientist introduces themselves, they are charged with answering a 2-part kickoff question. And that 2-part question is, why is the study of behavior important to you? And how does the science you do inform our understanding of behavior? And I'll just call people out. I'll start with Alex.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Rosati. I'm an associate professor of psychology and anthropology at the University of Michigan. The study of behavior is important to me because my primary research interest is the origins of the human mind, and specifically the origins of complex, flexible cognition and behavior that is especially exacerbated in our species. And the science I do informs our understanding of behavior because I specifically study other primate species to understand the cognitive building blocks that are either shared with humans or unique to humans, as well as compare across species to understand the evolutionary function of different cognitive and behavioral skills.
Thank you so much. How about we go to Sandeep? I'm sorry, Satra. I was thinking of my friend Sandeep. Why don't we go to you, Satra?
Thanks, Holly. My name is Satrajit Ghosh. I'm the director of Open Data and Neuroscience Initiative and a principal research scientist at MIT and an assistant professor of otolaryngology at Harvard Medical School. Our group focuses on human communication. How do we communicate with each other? How does our brain coordinate our communication? And how do we use communication as a window into the brain? So our sense of behavior comes from how the brain produces behavior in the form of communication, and also how can we use behavior to look at it as a window into the brain and thereby understand what might be aberrant, different in people of different kinds.
Thank you. And your answer to the question?
I thought that was my answer to the question.
Oh, that was a good answer. Sorry, that's me. Sorry, I'm going to reset myself now. How about we go to Marc?
Hi, I'm a neuroscientist in the biology department at the University of Pennsylvania, and I have developed a large aviary, which we call a smart aviary, equipped with 10 cameras and an array of microphones and other devices to record the dynamics of the social group during the entire breeding season. And to answer the questions, as a neuroscientist, me included, we tend to be very focused on mechanism. For example, how does the brain work to produce this or that? And the this or that is what I would sort of define as behavior. For example, whether I'm making a decision to choose one marshmallow or two, whether I should sing a specific song type, or whether I should produce a copulatory response to a mate. But in behavioral biology, this is known as sort of the proximate mechanisms. And so I'm interested in that. I'm interested in, how does the brain produce a song? How does the brain choose to produce one song over another? How does a female choose process the information to determine whether she should copulate with a mate or not? But in behavior, to really fully understand the behavior, you need to not just know how the behavior is produced, but also why the behavior is produced. And this was an important theme that Nico Tinbergen, a luminary in animal behavior, wrote, the famous Tinbergen's 4. He wrote for actually the birthday kind of celebration of his very good friend Konrad Lorenz when he turned 60. This was in 1963. And what he was interested in is to study behavior. Not only do you need to know the proximate mechanism, but also what he called the ultimate mechanism. So the evolutionary lens in which to look at behavior, but also the adaptive nature of behavior. So in that vein, what I'm trying to do as a neuroscientist is try to record the brains of these birds interacting in the group. But I also want to understand how does that lead to, in an adaptive nature, for example, reproductive success. So we can actually, in our aviary, also measure how many eggs are these females laying, and are the decisions they're making leading to these sort of types of outcomes.
Thanks a lot. Cheryl?
Hi, I'm Dr. Cheryl Corcoran. I'm an associate professor of psychiatry at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. So for the question of why behavior is important to me, I've always been intrigued by human behavior. As an adolescent, I read a lot of philosophy and literature into my adulthood. I knew I wanted to be a doctor, decided to become a psychiatrist because that would be the best way to study behavior. And then as a psychiatrist, became a clinical neuroscientist to really understand, quantify behavior and think about neural correlates. And then increasingly, I have been working with engineers and mathematicians and physicists to help really to develop tools to understand communication behavior, both normative and in different psychiatric illnesses.
Thank you so much. Nick?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Nick Szczecinski, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical Materials and Aerospace Engineering at West Virginia University. So my research area is robotics, but I've been working with neuroscientists for over a decade now to try to build biomimetic robots, where the robot serves as a reduced model of the animal through which we can study behavior or test hypotheses. So why is studying behavior important to me? Mostly because a robot only does what we tell it to do. And so, of course, historically, that means a very strict set of instructions. But what's interesting to me is to potentially have a machine that has say an intermediate level of autonomy, maybe like playing fetch with your dog, where you say, hey, robot, I need you to go over there and pick that thing up. But you don't tell it how to get there. You don't tell it what to look for to avoid, what might be interesting along the way. And so, you know, as I mentioned, by working with neuroscientists, I get to actually see some of the mechanisms, how animals do this, and then we try to implement this as part of our robot control systems. And so I'd like to think that that also addresses the second question, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Guy?
Good afternoon, everyone. I come from George Washington University. My name is Dr. Gaetano Lotrecchiano. I am an associate professor in the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership and of Pediatrics. My main area of interest is in the science of team science, studying mostly humans and how they construct an ethos of good teaming. So I am a human and organizational learning scientist. So my approach is very sociologically based. And when someone says to me behavior, I don't immediately think just about the observable behaviors of humans, as many of my colleagues here have also stated, but trying to understand the cognitive, humanist, the constructivist understanding of how that ethos and teaming is actually built. And we use that for evaluation to see if we can actually observe teaming principles and ongoing competency building in teams as teams continue to work with each other and individuals continue to go on their life course of learning as they work with other scientists and other stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Guy. And Laura?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Laura Cabrera. I'm an associate professor in engineering, science, and mechanics, as well as a senior research associate in the Rock Ethics Institute. But really, the work I do is in neuroethics and more broadly tech ethics, so ethical issues around emerging technologies or disruptive technologies. So the way I see behavior within the lens I have, well, ethics has to do with the standards or principles of what is right and wrong in terms of what prescribe how humans should behave, right? So I think this is a very nice interconnection of, in my field, we study what makes an ethical decision or what makes an ethical behavior, both at the individual level and the societal level. And in the way I approach neuroethics or my field, I use a lot of social science tools to understand behavior and to understand what are the causes, what the factors that might lead to certain individuals to act in a certain way, and as well as to understand how the morals around in a society change, right? Like why is that certain things that we were not seen as unethical now are seen as very unethical, and so that's part of the work I do and study.
Thanks very much. So to our audience, as you can see, we have 7 brilliant scientists here that have 7 very different perspectives on behavior, although not entirely different, but distinct perspectives. They use different species, different approaches. They deal with different kinds of data. and they often study they study behavior within different theoretical frameworks. So we brought them here together to share all these diverse perspectives, so to give the audience a really kind of diverse, interesting idea of the different ways we can study behavior. But we also have this kind of meta goal, and the meta goal is for this group to kind of be a mock-up of how a group of scientists coming in with very different perspectives and different sets of competencies and expertise can lay the groundwork for building a truly transdisciplinary team, going from interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary to transdisciplinary. And along those lines, as you heard, we have with us Guy Lotrecchiano, who is the expert in complex adaptive systems and team science. So along the way, he'll be giving us his insights into the competencies and processes that we need to pay attention to build good transdisciplinary teams. And before we go to him, I would like to spend a few extra minutes with Laura. She's our ethicist on the team. She also has to leave a little bit early because part of her ethos is to take care of her children. And so one of the things I'd like you to sort of share some thoughts before you have to go, Laura. And one of the questions that comes to mind, having listened to your talk, was the idea of inclusivity, the importance of including all kinds of people on transdisciplinary teams, not just scientists and engineers and other kinds of experts. So along those lines, what might, let's say the team was starting like this team is here. Who else would you like to see at the table? What thoughts do you have about inclusivity on a team that's starting out like this? And let's say for the purposes of the experiment here that we're a team, we're getting together to study communication, as was described by Satra. You don't know if the science is going to go in a basic direction or a clinical direction, or it might go both. Who else might you want to see here?
Mm-hmm. A philosopher. I think, like how communication, what is communication? So I think philosophers are really good at identifying questions that oftentimes we neglect to ask as we go into research. So certainly, and I've been very, fortunate of involving philosophers in my work, and they just add really very insightful expertise into transdisciplinary work. I guess also depending based on where the project goes into, having people with lived experience. And that's the tricky part because you left it very broad. But so, for example, if this is going for a clinical kind of component, having, patients for that are relevant to the type of questions that we're asking, or if you have, this is going to be used for military purpose, how do we enhance communication in a military setting, having, military members. So I think that is expertise from people with those lived experiences that become a key component of transdisciplinary teams.
Thank you so much. Do you have a few other thoughts you want to share before we turn to Guy, or we can go there and you might not have to leave before he's done?
I'll try to stay for as long as I can. I would just probably, for those that were not able to listen to my talk, I think, as we move forward to including different expertises, the challenge becomes, how to integrate all of these expertises. Some expertises might be perceived as more valuable than others. And so they're just very interesting complexities that come when we try to bring this type of teams. But I think it's very valuable to engage into this type of exercise for sure.
And just one of the things I was struck by in your talk along those lines was the idea of reflection and each of us questioning the assumptions underlying our belief of the best way of doing science, for example, and the approach we need to take and what's driving our belief in that, and why might it be time for us to do something different or not. But always questioning our assumptions and reflecting on what drives our beliefs with regard to the science we do. I thought that was a really important point. So why don't we turn now to Dr. Lotrecchiano, and do you have control of your slides?
Did that just change?
I don't know because I can't see, so I was just confirming.
Oh.
Try advancing.
Push to audience.
Yep. That worked.
See it now? Okay, great. I don't want to take up a lot of time today, but because we really want this to be a rich conversation. And I know probably most everyone on this call has heard about team science, has heard about the science of team science. So I'm not going to start at the beginning. I'm going to sort of start in light of our conversations here. So as Dana had described, the BBQS has baked into its value system this idea that transdisciplinary teams are necessary to be able to meet and reach the goals of some of the complex challenges that we're faced with. So we've heard from my colleagues on this panel about the different ways that they are interpreting or expanding, let's say, the concept of behavior. So as a team science person, I'm often looking for observational evidence that teams are working in certain ways to be able to reach their ultimate goals. So to expand what's been said before, we might think of those observations that are necessary to understand teams as being broader than just behavior, but also cognition, humanism, constructivism, the way that people construct the world that they're living in, and also social learning, how they are learning on a team, because a transdisciplinary team, and even an interdisciplinary team for that matter, has this assumption that we're learning from each other while we're doing the work. So our work together actually is transforming our own perceptions of the way to look at a problem. That breeds real innovation, and that breeds really what transdisciplinary work is meant to be. New models, new perceptions, new ways of thinking about a problem that have yet been thought about previously. So I'm giving you here just this list with some basic definitions, sort of as a primer as we move forward in our conversation. I also wanted to share how this might play out in a real life scenario. So some of the work that my team does is on team science competency. And we've established several domains related to team science competency. This one's domain 2, which is team communication. And I have to open a little bigger for me so I can see. If you look down the left side, we're using a sense-making framework. For those people who are not attuned to what sense-making theory is, it's that there are cues within our interactions that trigger meaning, and they create linkages with knowledge structures that organize and sort of excuse me, I'm having a tech issue here, that help us organize and become sort of the structures that we work with. Now, we can observe these cues, but we have to use different lenses at times to observe them. So for instance, in a team communication domain, the behavioralist observations might be things like, do people ask for clarification? Do they exercise regulation? Okay, basically making the link between engagement, being involved with each other, and understanding the knowledge structure of team contributions instead of single contribution. Cognitive observations are things that surface that tell us how a person's thinking about the best communication method, and actually giving thought to that, or maybe the team has given thought to that. And Laura actually brought this up in some of her comments. What is communication? How do we do communication? And what's best for our team? So we're trying to link that with a knowledge structure that emphasizes the need to contribute. And for the purpose of time, I'm just going to jump around a little bit. So when we look at, for instance, a social learning observation, we're looking for dependencies, or sometimes we call them interdependencies. So we can actually observe how individuals within teams facilitate communication between members. utilizing a growing skill or a growing competence to ensure that all members or all factions of a team, if it's a very large team, are actually interjecting so that we can all learn. And this actually becomes part of the flow of energy through the particular team or large group. Now, I want to say a little bit about the idea of competence. It's a little bit different than skill, the way it's defined, the way our definition is. Skill is something very basic that we can learn once and sort of check off that we know how to do it. When I'm with my students, I often say, a skill is being able to use a knife and fork. We always have to do that some point in our life, at age 2, at age 3, whatever, okay? But then to become competent in eating, it takes a lifetime to understand there's different ways to use the knife and fork. There are people in this world who use sticks to eat. There are people in this world who eat using bread in a communal dish or something like that. That is a lifelong building of one's competence. So what I'm going to share here are some areas that are complexities that our transdisciplinary teams need to have competency development constantly as part of their engagement. So if we are going to want to solve some complex problem, we need to understand that there's a heightened focus on anticipated future states. That complex problem is going to change. While we're trying to figure it out, it'll change before us. We need to co-develop shared mental models so that we can be knowledge-producing teams. Another area is stakeholder involvement. This has been brought up already. The translation of knowledge across disciplines, but then also across stakeholders, and establishing that interdependence between knowledge partners, no matter if they are scientists or if they are policymakers or if they are people that are possibly suffering from the complex problem that we are trying to figure out. Methodological pluralism, Dana also mentioned this, is a given, that we have to be able to be comfortable with the fact that no one of us may be completely trained in a way to understand all methodological or even epistemological lenses. And that is part of the exchange, the meta aspect of creating knowledge in a transdisciplinary team. And then lastly, another structural complexity is this idea of praxis, being able to bring theory, experience, etc., to actual scientific work, and that work is a product of both theoretical and evidence-based knowledge. The interactive system complexities are things really that have to do more with how we get along, how we engage, right? Thinking of our systems as open systems and not closed systems. So a team isn't always going to be the group of 5 that are on the grant necessarily. They could be and should be open to changing inputs, both from new knowledge areas or new individuals, etc. And then different shifting levels of reality. We often don't think about how my reality may be constructed very differently than another person's reality. And that, again, is normative. And it's also something that we need to ensure that people can actually be competent in that area, so not to stifle the idea that another person's or another discipline's perspective does not become less or doesn't become part of a hierarchy of science. And that observation from those different sciences actually contribute to the same end goal. It's just that there's different levels of reality that we're looking at. And lastly, what I call collaborative construction and reconstruction. Sometimes we need to take apart teams and put them back together to reach the goals that are necessary. And this very much can be basing our team construction on the type of competencies that are needed to reach the end goal of our work, not necessarily only the disciplines that we need. We might need other types of people that are not all, all sort of wound the same way. So I did this very quickly. In my pre-recorded talk, I go through this in a little bit more detail. I don't want to stifle our conversation. So I hope this was helpful just to give you an idea about why, when we look at, when we try to observe teams through these multiple lenses, we're actually trying to understand not only what teams do, but how they think, what's the affect they share with each other, what is the humanistic outlook they have, and how they can learn from each other. So I'm going to stop there for now for the sake of time, because I don't want to lose Laura while she's still here. Thank you.
Thank you. So just because of time, Laura, do you have additional thoughts before you have to take off?
Well, I think, this has been part of like the conversations or the thoughts that we have collectively already start seeding. And these are not, there's no easy answer, just as in ethics of, there's not that one recipe that will lead to success. So each team is different, and you just have to tinker around with, what amount of ingredients. So again, and this, I'm looking at this from like the ethics perspective. This to me just also becomes relevant when we think about now. Imagine what each member brings as an assumption of what is ethical to do in team science, right? So it just becomes really complex when we think about how to do this in an ethical manner.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to open it up to everybody. You can jump in with anything to get you started. If you'd like to have a question, I can bounce the question back to our panel. Who would you have at the table? Another question that came to mind as Guy was talking about intent and thinking about meaning. I just want to ask Nick, how do you get a robot to think about meaning or to detect or to generate meaning? This just came to my head. But I want to invite everybody in and just raise your hand and start. Let me raise your hand and I'll call on you. Or I'll be like a teacher and call on you anyway. Cheryl, would you like to get us started? Who would you have at the table? Here's another question. What questions are like the most kind of right to be informed by transdisciplinary science? Or like what burning question about behavior do you have that requires a transdisciplinary team? There's another question. Why don't you kick us off, Cheryl? You have to unmute.
I think you're muted, Cheryl.
I have found it very useful and productive and fun and exciting to work with engineers and mathematicians and physicists. They have a very different way of looking at things. I've been working, say, like Guillermo Cecchi, who's part of LabRoots for the past 10 years. We're now good friends. So you have to enjoy the people that you work with. I think I mentioned during my talk, we started working together and I was looking to him to help provide tools for understanding behavior among the people who had different diagnoses. And his agenda was to spend time with psychiatrists and psychologists to see how we thought so he could build systems that would model what we do. Most mathematicians and physicists I know, Laura, are also philosophers. So you get a little bit of philosophy with that as well. And you also mentioned, Laura, the importance of having individuals with lived experience and people from the community. And I study schizophrenia, and now all of the studies that we do involve input from people who have schizophrenia, as well as family members, such as the National Alliance for Mental Illness. That perspective has also been instrumental. And I also think it's important to have a team that has younger, more junior people. Often, not only are they very energetic, but they haven't been as siloed yet, and they tend to have really good ideas. That's what I would say.
Thank
I'm
you.
still interested in the robot question, though, that Nick dodged.
Yeah, why don't we bounce over to you, Nick?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm gonna dodge it a little bit more first, because I think all the things Cheryl bring up, are I feel like my perspective is complementary to hers in this particular case. As a younger person who is coming from engineering, yeah, I mean, everything you said really resonates. I think it is a real challenge to train people to think in this interdisciplinary way and to simultaneously hold on to what their base training is, and then also be willing to branch out into another field. And, right when you feel like you finally know what you're talking about, you now have to go back to square one, and you're now a beginner in a different field. And I don't know, it's really challenging, and it is really exciting. I mean, that's why I find myself at this interface between mechanics and robotics and neuroscience, because to me, it's wonderful. I am always learning something new. But it's not necessarily an easy way to live one's life, and I have to feel that maybe the traditional way in which degrees are awarded and students are trained maybe needs to change to fit this a little better. And I don't have any panacea for that. This is just something that I'm becoming acutely aware of. So I can talk about robot meaning, but others should jump in on this. Yeah.
Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with some of the points that have been raised. So I think for me personally, some of the collaborations that have been most productive, but also the most personally fulfilling, are ones where everybody has a genuine curiosity and understanding the other people's perspectives. And even folks who come from, in some sense, related disciplines can do things in such different ways that you have to really restructure how you think about things to put yourself in that other space. And so for me, like, for example, post tenure, I feel like I have a lot more freedom actually to say I'm going to spend the time necessary to do those things. But I agree that it's a problem for junior scholars in that degrees aren't awarded in interdisciplinary topics in quite that way, in most cases. I'd also pick up something I think Cheryl mentioned, which is that I do actually think that, I mean, collaborations can work when everybody kind of has their little domain and agrees in a common goal. But actually, when folks really like each other and get along in some interpersonal way, this can really facilitate the, like, I want to do this collaboration because I like hanging out with you. And so if at least there's some core of people that have, the like friendly camaraderie or something to start it off, I think it can make the whole process of doing science, fun. So it's not just about finding out facts, but that the scientists themselves want to do their job, not just check off, yeah, I did this grant aim or something like that. So, I think that these are all sort of sociological aspects of getting a larger group of people together that are actually functional and productive.
Yeah, along those lines. Oh, so Satra, you go.
I was just going to bring in this notion that when humans communicate, they tend to align with each other. Over time, we speak in similar cadences, we get to similar tones. And so there's this natural tendency for us to seek out alignment in some ways. And I find constructive disagreement has actually been quite beneficial to the kinds of teams that have come together, looking at it from different perspectives, disagreeing with each other initially, but that alignment process that I think naturally happens in the brain kind of brings them together to find common ground. And that's been very productive in a lot of consortial and other team projects that I've had experience with.
Marc, do you want to go, or I see your hand is up?
I'm just scratching my hair here, listening to all the great comments.
Okay. Guy, and yeah, and I like Guy to jump in here, but I have a thought that I'd like you to address too, and that is when people kind of are aligned in terms of respecting each other and liking each other, like Alex said, does it make it easier to sort of disagree and deal with disruptive processes?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry about that. That was my bad. That was a question for everybody, but first for Guy, because I saw that he wanted to jump in.
So I think what I'm hearing a lot of is exactly where the science of team science came from. We're trying to figure out, do we do better work when we actually have a strong affect for the people that we're working with? Meaning, do we like working with them? Therefore, we do good work, right? Do we eventually align our mental models with each other simply because we've worked with each other longer? But I think the extension of that comes down to how would we evaluate that? So, we want to be able to say, this is how teams work well. And we want to be able to observe that and to be able to say, not just because we went to college together, you can actually become too familiar with your team members to the point where nobody wants to disagree with each other any longer. And you're moving away from that idea that diversity and multimodality is actually good for the science. You see what I mean? So I think that's sort of the paradox. Everyone has said something that is completely true of what we hope team science to be. However, when it comes to actually being able to say, we know from evidence that teams do best in this area when they behaviorally do this, when they think this, when they understand the humanistic value of this. That actually points us into the direction of, then we can evaluate if teams are just, landing in the right place, or are we actually creating scientists, both developmentally and for the rest of their life, to be constantly aware of these social mechanisms as they do team science for the rest of their career. And I actually, if you don't mind me posing a question myself, I'd love to hear from the panel here. How do you evaluate if your teams are working well? Like, what do you use as your measuring stick if a team is working well?
The usual, one, I'm a little embarrassed to say, but papers you write together, grants you get together, opportunities to work together, symposia, conferences.
And there's a whole period of time where we looked at the end result to give us the answer to what was going on leading up to that. So it's sort of saying, yes, if you're, just because you write a lot of papers with other people doesn't mean you exercise good teaming. You just happen to get the papers out, right?
Nick?
Yeah, as someone who both is a part of some very large collaborations and who just started a new lab a couple years ago and is trying to create a little micro collaboration with 10 students, I think everything Cheryl said, of course, rings true. But there's two additional things, at least that I've noticed among my groups. One is barrier for co-authorship, which may stumble into unethical. So I'm not trying to be sketchy here, right? But I think when an environment is really competitive in a destructive way, I notice students become very guarded, where they might meet with a a more senior faculty member who's an advisor for them, and they might talk with them every couple weeks. But then when they're writing up the paper, they'll be like, well, they didn't like actually do any, analysis. They didn't actually help me write the paper, and it's, I guess that I find that people are more open when they feel like the team is actually adding benefit to themselves, to the work that they're trying to do. And so that kind of openness, I think, is one thing. And another thing that's maybe a little, again, maybe borderline dangerous is enthusiasm for being in the lab, where when no one wants to work with other people, they're not in the lab. But now I'll find my students are there for hours and hours because they all work together and they help each other solve problems. And it's, so those are maybe toward what Guy is getting at, where these are measurable, but they're still not like traditional hard metrics. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on these.
The idea of team leaders being aware of the motivations of team members is really helpful, because if you know what's motivating someone to join your team and you disregard that motivation, well, they're not going to be as open as you'd like them to be. They're going to sort of hold things closer to the chest if they feel that they're not getting out of it what they were hoping to get out of it. And of course, the unfortunate thing is that carries to the next team experience. And so, I think what you stated is very, very important. And there are ethical ramifications to all that. Yeah.
Marc.
Yeah, I just wanted to paint a less rosy picture from my perspective, and I was scratching my head a little bit because I was listening intently. So one of the issues that I'm struggling with a little bit is that the team that I had was I think pretty cohesive at the level of the PIs. So we wrote the grants together, we became good friends, but then it trickles down to which student is going to work on the team from different labs, and I had one person who was a postdoc who was a great bridge between my lab and engineering lab, and he organized meetings. And at that time, I felt like it was a very good team. And then he left for industry, and then there was a big hole. And now, the students don't necessarily want to do what their bosses tell them, because why would I want to work with birds when I can do facial recognition or whatever? And so from the engineering side, and I part of our conversations, we also talked before a little bit about sort of hierarchies of certain disciplines, think they may be a little bit better than others. And I feel that now with certain people from engineering, where they're feeling like they're doing me a favor rather than really wanting to be together. But one of the big struggles that I have right now is that I have several members of my team that are kind of remote. And so that chemistry is not happening. And I don't, if I have a choice between Zoom and walking half a mile and meeting the person, I'll always walk half a mile to meet the person. I think it's so much more important. And that's really missing for me. And so I'm struggling with that.
Satra, do you want to jump in on that one?
He has an answer for me.
I love the word Marc said. He used the word bridge. And I think going back to Guy's question, the number of bridges that exist and the number of people crossing those bridges, either randomly or directedly, to us has been a good measure of the success of that project, just qualitatively. We've never actually measured it quantitatively, but qualitatively, the more bridges, the more connections there have been across teams, and the more random people that weren't part of an individual connection or bridge that crossed a bridge together led to better outcomes for us in various kind of team scenarios. So I love that word bridge that Marc was talking about. And maybe, I don't know how to build better bridges or different kinds of bridges, but that could be something we could measure as part of the way to look at the output.
Yeah. And to Marc's point, I think we are in a place in history where a lot is changing very rapidly. You mentioned, generative AI, for instance, right? And the ability to use that tool to provide some of those bridges with both humans and mechanisms, but also the affective part of being able to just say, hey, Marc, I was on my way down the hall and I thought I'd throw this idea at you. What do you think? The world is changing to a point where we need to sort of rethink how are we going to maintain that affective nature of collaboration when most of us are now Zooming all day long.
But
So
it's
it
not even
requires
Zoom, it's Slack, right? It's like messages on Slack back and forth, and that just doesn't. The affective part is not there. You can put emojis, but it doesn't help.
It's different. It's not going to go away. So you have to intentionally figure out how are we going to make these systems and tools that are available to us work to our benefit, so we don't lose the cohesion that is necessary to work on a project together. But I'm going to stop because I see there's questions, and I don't know how Holly wants to handle them.
Yeah, I do want to go to Alex with something there, but I want to turn to this question that's about team science. Team members with diverse sensory abilities, sight or hearing impaired, for examples, often bring unique perspectives and modes of operation to a project. Have panel members had similar or divergent experiences with people who have different abilities? I can say I myself have had experience with people who speak more slowly, people who may have different modes of speaking that require patience at first if you're not used to it. And my experience there, for example, was that it was worth the wait, right? So once this person wanted to talk, it was well worth the wait to wait to listen. And then have any of the rest of you worked with people who have different abilities, or think about divergent abilities as you're designing your research or designing your labs or writing protocols?
Input from individuals with lived experience with the illnesses that we study, which is great.
And I will comment briefly on, there's another question in the chat that relates more specifically to some of the topics that Laura was talking about in her talk, probably more specific to the expertise of Laura and Guy. And I will make sure that question is answered after the session, since Laura is not with us here anymore. One of the things that Satra, the bridging, and Marc were talking about, I wanted to kind of bounce back to Alex, because I'm assuming that a lot of, and Marc too, like I'm assuming that there's a lot of field work involved in what you do. And I'm wondering what your experience is like with teams where part of the team can do their work by sitting in front of a computer. They can do their work remotely. The other part of the team can't. They have to be in the field. And how does that affect cohesion? What can you do to assure cohesion when physically the parts of the team have to be in different places to do their jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say for me, I do field research, and so we work in a variety of international sites. This, in many cases, folks in my research group, for example, will spend some time in the field and some time back on campus. So there's often the same individual in different modes. But we also have some work where, we work collaboratively, for example, with a chimpanzee sanctuary in Uganda, where their team is continuously collecting data, and we sort of oversee the management of that data in some way. And that's posed a lot of challenges and opportunities. So it's more difficult to communicate with them just because of internet access things. So we've had to create ways that work on both sides to get information back and forth between us. For sure, I'd say, highlighting something mentioned previously, that we do go routinely in person and have in-person meetings, and that establishes the personal relationships that then are easier to sustain in electronic ways if they already have some basis in reality, right? So if you, collaborators, where I already know them really well, and then I had to Zoom with them for 2 years, it wasn't a big deal. But people where I didn't know them very well and the whole relationship was built around Zoom, I would say it was not as effective. That's also a case where there are major there can be major cultural differences. So, it's an American team and a Ugandan team, and the way stuff is communicated or what's thought to be important can require a lot of cultural sensitivity. I think in general, that's all strengthened the project because we're all really invested in maintaining a long-term partnership. But, if we weren't invested in maintaining that partnership, I think probably people would do stuff without thinking about it, I guess. They would have their reaction of what they think is the right thing without thinking through what is beneficial and necessary for the other side.
Can I just add?
Go ahead, Guy. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add to that point really quickly. About 12 years ago, I did research with a National Rare Diseases Network, and it was to understand the differences between roles in the network and disciplines in the network. And when you did comparison of that, and it was all about measuring the ability to change. It was using a tool called the Organizational Cultural Assessment Instrument. And it was interesting because when you look at it separately between disciplines and the roles people have in a team, you actually come up with different answers. So it was interesting to find that the co-PIs were the ones that were least ready for change. And that in some cases, some disciplines don't necessarily need to be involved in every decision. They're perfectly happy sort of doing their thing. So to give a concrete example, what I found was, and this is dealing with rare metabolic disorders, the nutritionists were very happy to say, we're just really happy if you send us the data, we will create the diets, and that's what we do, and that's what we do well. So the idea that all team members have to be equal is not the same as all team members need to have equity. And I think that's something that's hard because we don't want to the point that Marc has made earlier, we don't want to develop disciplinary hierarchies. But at the same time, as human beings, we have to remember that some types of people like to just be left alone because that's the best way they can do their part of the study. And other people are much more eager to get out there either in a natural field or even in a clinical field because that's what they do best. This is the hard part about balancing what is the right combination. And that's why we try to focus on the complexities and how you might be able to cope with those complexities with some sort of tangible model of how to observe what's going on.
Satra, and then we'll end with a question that's in the Q&A.
I'm going to let Cheryl speak first, and then I'll come.
I'm just going to say in a sentence, I think it's important to have celebrations. It's leveling, and it's fine if people want to work by themselves, but they now and then want to be with the team, and it could be dinners, could be going to conferences. I think, it could be somebody's baby shower. The celebrations are really important, I think. That's all.
Satra?
I want to bring in a hackathon as one of those examples of team science. It's been one of the most fulfilling experiences over the last 15, 16 years. And it kind of embodies a lot of the things that Guy talked about just now. Expertise that exists in the room, people behaving in this push-pull manner. You pull in somebody with expertise towards solving something, or you push a problem out to somebody else who could solve that problem. And in many ways, it's lively, it connects people, at least the in-person type of hackathons. Virtual ones have been a little more complicated, although they can happen. But it embodies where people aren't there with a very specific goal all the time. Some people are there just to be part of somebody else's goal. And that's the kind of thing that I think helps in a lot of ways, where the people coming together. Now, the downside of it is, as we have seen, almost the same people kept coming back to these hackathons. It was almost a cultural notion that some people like that type of thing and they kept coming back to it. And after a while, again, they could understand each other, and that created a wall around that event. And it was harder for other people to penetrate that wall when that happened. So it was, as an example, a way in which you saw something nice out of the cooperation, the collaboration that was going on, but also saw this way of isolating others, because suddenly knowledge grew in that system and alignment grew that made it harder for others to come in. And a lot of effort has been put now towards thinking about how to bring the others in, having understood that that initial part created those walls around it.
Thanks. I'm noting the time, and I'm going to ask our LabRoots colleague, Melanie, do we have to stop, or can we do a few more minutes?
No, absolutely. A few more minutes is okay.
Yay. Okay. So on Satra's note, I saw that Guy had was leaning in, and I also want to get to an important question in the chat. So Guy, would you like to go next?
I wasn't leaning in with a purpose.
Okay. So this kind of relates to a lot of things we've been talking about, and it's a question from our co-lead of brain behavior quantification and synchronization, Holly Lisenby. It's back to the question of neurodiversity, people with different kinds of abilities, and she has had the privilege of working with the deaf community, and leads her to ask whether some of the speech and facial expression analysis and some of the computational approaches that Satra is familiar with, maybe some AI type things that you could actually learn from robots. But can we use this kind of technology that can sometimes be disruptive to also create tools to help us communicate with each other better when we have very different modes of communication, like with the deaf community? There are lots of other people who do not understand American Sign Language and would like to have an instant kind of like Google Translate kind of app for that. How do we get that technology to work for us to actually build better teams?
Question.
Satra.
Can I just start with that? It's a great question. And one of the things is, we all know how well Google Translate works, right? Across languages.
It doesn't.
A lot of these
Yeah.
linguistic translators or multi-language translators have a long way to go to truly communicate intent and other components and cultural awareness across that conversational boundary. And I would say that's true when we apply these things, even in the context of the deaf community or others. Sure, technology exists. In fact, there is an app out there which tries to do sign language reading to turn it into a language that one could understand if they don't understand sign language. The challenge with many of these things today are still the nuances of communication. It's really hard for many of these things to convey the cultural differences, the awarenesses, through the lens of the technologies, which to me means it's an opportunity for somebody to come there and build out these tools, because it would be really nice to be able to involve these individuals, to involve that neurodivergence or divergent perspectives into the teams as much as possible.
Nick.
Yeah, I wanna build on Satra's point and enthusiasm, because I agree. This is a very compelling idea because it sounds damn near impossible to do right. And so now I almost feel like I'm in this meta layer of the conversation. What team would I build to solve that problem, which would help with other teams? And I think we've talked about having stakeholders present, right? I mean, I think that's so important. And I'm also thinking back to Marc's earlier comment, as an engineer and as someone who works with a lot of engineers, well, I don't want to speak on everyone's behalf, but I'm sympathetic to the kinds of challenges that have been described. And I think part of building a team that, for example, could build a translator of this type would require the engineers themselves to also have an authentic interest in it, right? And I find that very challenging working in an engineering department, trying to do biological and neuroscientific work. I might have a lot of talented students, but they just don't care. And I need to just wait until the right students come around. So where am I going with this? I don't know. I think it's a cool idea, and I think that it is extremely challenging, and that's a really great exercise just to think about all the different ideas we've talked about. Yeah.
Guy.
Sorry, couldn't get my hand in the window there. I think when we talk about different abilities, while the larger spectrum are language barriers and possibly even barriers that are physical or intellectual, that sort of thing. We're also talking about the difference between individuals who have different processing speeds, who really need to sit there and listen to everything before they're even going to peep, right? And you'd think, well, the solution to that is to poke them and get them to talk earlier, but that's not their preferred processing. We have other people that are ready to give an answer before the questions even finish asking the question. These are just as important as language barriers or differences in intellectual ability. There are emotional, differences. Some people have really difficult time staying within the emotional boundaries of the team. I don't think it's a matter of ever looking at it as right or wrong, but it's a matter of understanding sometimes we need to learn the landscape of these dynamics so that individuals can communicate in ways that are best for them, not what's best for us. And that's the rest of us. That's a hard thing to accept. And I think now, even multi-generationally, we're dealing with that problem where, some of us still keep a notebook to write notes, and, our students are going a mile a minute on their phones, and I think even there is a difference in preference to communication that can be a barrier to good teaming, but it doesn't have to be if you frame it in a way of just understanding this is just difference. It's not right, wrong, good, bad. It's just difference.
Well, thanks. And I think that we should probably, I could stay here and listen to you guys all night. And I think we probably should wrap it up. I will end with a little story. I mentored an Intel science student a long time ago. And in that contest, the person who won that year was a person who invented a glove, a sensor glove, so that when the person was doing American Sign Language, it actually translated. So that was a high school student, interestingly enough, who had a family member, if I remember right. It might be a good example of a starting point, but obviously that was the kind of person who needed a team to do kind of what Holly Lisenby was talking about in her question.
And the team needed the person.
And the team needed that person.
You need the young people. They have a new perspective.
Agreed. So I'm going to thank everybody here. Thanks to Dana for launching this for us and for co-leading BBQS. Thank you to all of you. I wish we could be a team for a long time, but and I really wish the best to all of you with your science and to building your own transdisciplinary teams. And thanks again to LabRoots for this awesome event.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, LabRoots. Thank you.